All right, so in the last video, I showed you how to do a waist knot and I started a continental stitch. So there are two stitches that I'm going to teach in this class. One is continental and one is basket weave. These are called tent stitches. They are your basic tent stitches. There's one called half stitch that I'm not going to teach. It doesn't have as much coverage. It's really best for your needle point, the integrity of your needle point, for you to use a full coverage stitch for most of your needle point canvas. So your canvas, this is a needle point canvas is called a mono canvas, and it is woven, okay? And so it has different intersections. So you are stitching over the little intersections, and a tent stitch always goes from the bottom right to the top left, or vice versa, from the top left to the bottom right. So it is always, the stitch that you see on the front of your canvas is from Arizona to New York, okay? Southwest to northeast. So I've already stitched a lot of this row, as you can see on this canvas. So I'm just doing a little horizontal row of stitches. So if you're stitching on your canvas and you get to the end of a painted area and it's time to go the other direction now, with continental stitch, you can go the other direction as well. So first, on this one, I'm coming up through what is called a clean hole. In this hole, there's no other thread through it now. Okay, so in this direction, it's going to be the easiest to stitch. You're coming up through a clean hole, you're going down through a clean hole. Now, when you reverse and go the other way, you instead are going to do it backwards. And you're going to come up what is called a dirty hole, which sounds gross, but that's what it is because it already has thread there. Okay, so when you're coming up through that, you're going to come up through the northeast corner of that intersection, and then you're going to take the thread back down the southwest corner. So when I'm going back down this row, I am now going from New York to Arizona. New York to Arizona. And the reason I am coming up that direction is to give full coverage in this continental stitch. So in a moment, I'll show you the back of my canvas and how this allows for full coverage. And it just keeps more integrity of your canvas. Okay, so if I turn this over and show you, you can see on the back, the stitches are very slanted and they're completely covering up each intersection. That is continental stitch. Okay, now I'm going to show you the wrong way, which would actually be half stitch. Now, it happens. Sometimes you're making all kinds of turning different angles on your canvas, and it may happen. It's not a big deal. I just don't recommend stitching your entire canvas this way. Okay, so instead, if I did not come up from the top left to the bottom right, if instead I went from left to right this direction and went from Arizona to New York, I'll show you what happens to the back of your canvas. It's going to look different, and it is not going to have as much coverage. It does use less thread. So if you ever run into a situation on your canvas where you're running low on thread, you could do this to try to save some thread. So if I did it that way, I'm going to turn it over and you see how it's going up and down. I'm not getting that pretty slant that's completely covering the canvas. That's a half stitch, okay? And so I just don't recommend it for the integrity of your canvas. I recommend that you, when you're going from left to right, go from the upper corner, New York, to Arizona. New York to Arizona. Okay, and again, when I'm doing this, you'll see that I start getting that full coverage again, okay? And so then when I went down to do the next row, then I would reverse it again. So in stitching, you are usually moving, if you're right-handed, from the top right-hand corner across or down. I'll show you basket weave in another video, which is my preferred stitch. But this is Continental. So I'm also going to show you Continental you can use going up and down your canvas, okay? So I'm gonna take it down here. On the canvas I've given you, I've got a rectangle, a horizontal rectangle, and I've got a vertical rectangle. So if we're doing a vertical rectangle, if we're wanting to stitch, we can stitch up and down, okay? So I can start at, because sometimes you're going to have letters and different things on your canvas that may only be 1 or 2 rows thick. And so you're gonna need to move in a vertical instead of horizontal manner. So for this, when I'm going from the top of my canvas down, I am still moving from Arizona to New York. Arizona to New York. Arizona to New York, okay? See how I've got that full coverage? Now, say I'm wanting to reverse and go back up, okay? So when I'm working from the bottom of my canvas up, then I'm going to reverse that stitch again, just like I did from going left to right. So this time I'm going to go from New York to Arizona. New York to Arizona. New York to Arizona. And I just keep following along in that way. And when I do, I have full coverage on the back of my canvas, okay? So that is Continental Stitch. Again, Continental Stitch can be used as long as you stitch forever. It's not wrong. Some stitchers think, oh, everybody has to move on to basket weave. You don't. I prefer basket weave, but that's just a personal preference. To be honest, from the front, it usually looks the same. It's a tent stitch. Basket weave is a tent stitch as well. Okay, I'm going to show you how to cast off your thread. When you get to a certain point where your thread is getting short, you could do a few more stitches in this thread and be okay. But you do not want this thread to get too short. Because if you do, then it becomes really hard to cast it off. I do this all the time, but it's really not a good idea. So what I'm gonna wanna do, I wanna make sure that my thread is anchored so that my stitches do not unravel. So what you do, it is not really recommended that you go through the stitches you just stitched. You should really try to find a row that's near, okay? I'm kind of in a dilemma here because I just have these 2 rows stitched. So I could just take it down here, okay? Or I could take it up here and run it through these stitches. And so you're just gonna run it through the back of several stitches, okay? And pull that all the way through so that your thread is anchored. And now you can just trim that down. I trim it down. That way when I'm stitching, I don't pull that loose thread back through my canvas, okay? So now they're anchored. You want to cast off horizontally or vertically. It is not recommended that you cast off diagonally. And I'll kind of demonstrate that more in my next video on basket weave.